We had a couple of crazy Game 7s last night, which seen two of the top teams in the NHL's regular season, the defending Stanley Cup champions, Avalanche, and the President's Trophy winning Bruins both be eliminated. We'll take a look at those series as they wrapped up. We also have several signings around the league, other news involving the Ottawa Senators ownership as well, some prospect news, and a potential trade we might see in the offseason between the Jets and the Capitals. A lot more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we had quite the evening last night. A couple of crazy Game 7s with the Avalanche and the Bruins both falling and being eliminated for the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. In my opinion, the more shocking, bigger upset here was the Bruins going down to the Panthers. They had a 3-1 series lead. The gap between the Bruins and Panthers in the regular season was over a 40-point gap. The Bruins on a historical record-setting regular season. And this was an absolute collapse. This wasn't just an upset, total collapse. They had a 3-1 series lead, and in the 3 games they lost, they had multiple leads during those games, and they managed to blow it, which is such an uncharacteristic thing of this team based on how the regular season has gone. But to me, last night in Game 7, the Bruins, they really appeared to be playing very tentative. They were not having solid execution. They couldn't make a lot of good passes. Just a lot of little mistakes that were just uncharacteristic. They put in Jeremy Swayman, who hasn't played in over 2 weeks. I think, maybe he might want 1 or 2 of those goals back, but at the same time, they didn't lose because of Swayman. He kept them in it, gave them a chance. They did go to overtime. I mean, you can't ask for much more when it comes to an entertainment standpoint of Game 7 overtime. Brandon Montour was a beast for the Panthers, putting up 2 goals. He's had quite the season for Florida. A major coming out party into his late 20s. So he had another strong night. And Carter Hagee scored the overtime winner and just stunned the Bruins. The crowd went silent as soon as the puck went in, as you can imagine. The look on the Bruins' faces, including Captain Patrice Bergeron, was just like they were stunned and shocked. And you have to wonder, too, was this the end for Bergeron? I mean, as the game ended, and the Bruins waited for the Panthers to finish their celebration and head off the ice so they could salute their fans. All of the Bruins players were giving big hugs to Bergeron. He gave a salute to the crowd. So you have to think that there's a good chance that was it. I mean, he did talk to the media after the game and said that he didn't know what the future held, and he would talk to his family and make a decision. But you have to think that between him and his teammates, there's a good chance that was it. And certainly not the way you'd want to end your career, but he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's had, such a strong, successful career. Not the way you probably envisioned ending it, but, it is what it is. We'll have to wait and see. They're going to be an interesting team to watch. Of course, the Bruins contracts this year for Bergeron and Krejci, signing them to cheap salaries, allowed them to do a lot of other things with their roster and really stack up here to go on a run, which they were hoping to do. But it also, because of that, it had bonus structure built into those contracts, which they're going to pay the price for next year. They're already going to have $4.5 million counting against the cap next year, which is going to handcuff them from keeping a lot of this roster together. And they will have to make at least some tough decisions as well. So be interested to see the fallout from this for sure. Let me know your thoughts on why the Bruins collapsed and what the Panthers will hold here in the next round as they'll take on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, we also seen the defending Stanley Cup champion Avalanche fall in Game 7 last night against the Seattle Kraken in their second season, first playoff series win now. Game 7, 2-1 victory. Both goals were scored by Oliver Bjorkstrand, who they got on a real cheap trade from the Jackets because of the signing of Johnny Gaudreau. Nathan MacKinnon technically scored 2 goals last night, but the first goal ended up being credited to Mikko Rantanen because it did hit his pants, I guess, on the way in. And the second goal was called back because his teammate, I believe it was Lehkonen, was offside by a little bit, and the goal was nullified. Now, the reason I said the Bruins got collapsed was much more of an upset than this one is the Avalanche were hardcore banged up. The Bruins, yes, they were dealing with a few things, but the Avalanche had no Gabriel Landeskog all year. They had lost Nichushkin earlier in the playoffs, which that's still a big mystery. We don't know the whole story there. There has been some stories that have been out there in the media, but the team or the player, nobody's really talked about it besides a few reporters. So he's been out. They didn't have Josh Manson, Darren Helm, Andrew Cogliano. A lot of guys were out. And, obviously the Kraken just had better depth. The Avalanche never had any goals from their bottom six whatsoever in the entire series. The Kraken scored the first goal in every game. Philip Grubauer was on a mission to really stick it to his old team, and the Kraken come out victorious. It's quite a story. So they will now move on, and the Kraken will face the Dallas Stars in the next round. And comes back to Boston for a second. We did find out as well that Bergeron was dealing with a herniated disc in his back, which is why he missed the first few games of the series. So he was still trying to play through that. And the Kevin Weeks is reporting as well, which is what I had mentioned before and suspected. The Linus Ullmark was dealing with an injury that involved a lot of pain, which really leads us to the bigger question here as well, is why did they not turn to Jeremy Swayman sooner? There was, I think it was game 2 or 3, I can't remember which one it was. Ullmark was a game time decision. So clearly the injury happened leading up to that, and they still rode him the rest of the way until game 6. Which I don't understand. I know Jim Montgomery had a fantastic year in Boston, a record-setting season, of course, but some questionable coaching decisions in that series as well, which I think is part of the reason why they ended up falling. Of course, tonight in the next hour here, as I record this video, we will have Game 7 between the Rangers and the Devils, which will conclude Round 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Round 2 starts tomorrow. We will have a few series starting on Tuesday. The rest will start on Wednesday, and kind of go from there. But the Devils, Rangers go tonight. And of course, the road teams have fared much better in Game 7s. I know Rangers, Devils are pretty close proximity, but still the Rangers did better in the Devils arena and vice versa. So we'll see who wins tonight. Is it going to be the more experienced Rangers team or the up-and-coming Devils team? They've kind of gone back and forth in this series, and it's difficult to say really what to expect. Now, as I mentioned, we also have a bunch of other news to look at, including a bunch of prospect news and some signings. We have the Winnipeg Jets today announced that they've signed one of their prospects, 20-year-old Nikita Chabrikov, who was a 2021 second-round pick. He's been playing in Russia for the last couple of years since being drafted. Season's over, and he's now signing his ELC with the Winnipeg Jets. So expectation is he'll make the jump to North America and likely be in the Jet system in some capacity next year. So that's an interesting prospect. They're excited to get in there. And the Washington Capitals as well. We got news that they, earlier today, seen news that he was being made available to the Capitals, but now he signed, and that's Ivan Miranushenko. So, of course, he was drafted by the Capitals a couple of years back, had a battle with some health issues as well, missed some time, but certainly battled through. Is looking like a real promising piece of the future in Washington. He had mutually agreed to terminate his contract and part ways with his KHL team, and now is officially signed to his 3-year ELC in Washington. And the Washington Capitals also announced today that they've extended young defenseman Alexander Alexiev. He gets a 2-year extension at $825,000 as well. Some signings on Long Island today as well. We've seen a couple, including Hudson Fasching, who was a real nice find by the Islanders this year. Really proved to be a pretty important piece of the bottom six, playing mostly on the third line. I know on Locker Cleanup Day, this is a short time ago, he was asked if he was interested in staying at Long Island because he was a pending UFA. And he said absolutely he was. Well, it didn't take long to get a deal done. They've signed him to a 2-year contract extension at $775,000. So that's a nice piece there if he can continue to play like he had been. That's going to be good for the Islanders. Zach Parise, who also played on that line, made it clear in their Locker Cleanup Day that he'll either retire or sign again with the Islanders. He signed for a very similar contract that Fasching has had here in the last couple times that he's played with the Islanders. So you got to wonder if he signs for the same kind of deal that you could have 2 members of your third line making up just over $1.5 million. So that would be good value for them if they stay. Parise did have a strong season, so it'll be interesting to see if he continues playing on or how all that works out. The Islanders also announced today that they've signed prospect Matthew Maggio, who's a 2022 fifth-round pick who played in the OHL for the Windsor Spitfire. So he gets his 3-year ELC. And another player to watch is for a potential buyout or trade in the offseason regarding the Islanders is longtime forward Josh Bailey. I know during their Locker Cleanout Day, he made it known that he wants to play next year. He does have a contract for one more year, and that he's not interested in being an extra piece that's always scratched on the sidelines. So, he was asked, and obviously didn't sound like he was real thrilled about not playing in the playoffs and getting to be a healthy scratch a decent amount of regular season as well. So obviously the Islanders are like many teams that don't have a ton of cap space and could certainly use any flexibility they can find. Bailey, obviously, if they can move on from that contract, would be great. Now, of course, to do that, though, they're likely going to have to add some kind of a sweetener to it, a draft pick of some sort. Maybe a team like Chicago or Arizona. I don't know, a team that obviously that's not going to, care too much about winning right now, so they'll take the extra draft pick in order to take it. Or they could consider a buyout, which was not going to be obviously quite as good, but wouldn't cost the extra asset. Instead, it'll have an extra year of a cap hit, where it'll be 2/3 of the money over 2 years instead of 1. So either way, I think the odds are that Josh Bailey won't be with the Islanders next year, that they'll find a way to move on from the veteran forward. Now, we also got some pretty substantial news out of Calgary today, which there is a dedicated video on the channel, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but just in case you missed it, I'll direct you there. The Flames announced today that they fired head coach Daryl Sutter, which is, interesting timing, because, when Brad Treliving left, a lot of the NHL insiders and reporters were saying that one of the big reasons why he didn't want to renew his contract was that Sutter was going to be there for a few years, and that he didn't think he could work with him anymore. That he was, on a professional level at least, that they just couldn't see eye to eye, and that, weren't happy with how things were handled behind the bench, and especially with the young players and all that. And now Treliving's gone, and now Sutter's gone too. It's just kind of interesting. So the Flames are going to have a whole new clean slate. So new president of hockey ops and interim GM Don Maloney announced that the new GM will be responsible for hiring the next head coach. And that's obviously what the next step will be, is to figure out who the permanent full-time GM will be. And I know a lot of people are hoping Craig Conroy, a longtime assistant GM with the Flames and former player himself, would get that opportunity. But we'll have to wait and see where that goes. But obviously some more significant news out of Calgary. There's lots of players we've talked about in the Flames organization in trade rumors, because they made it clear that they would not want to play in Calgary anymore if Sutter was behind the bench. So up until this point, we had every indication to think that Sutter was returning. And if that's the case, you can expect those players to likely be looking for trades. And things will probably settle down in that regard. Now that Sutter is out, we'll have to wait and see who the new GM and coach is before we get a better feel for what direction the team's going to go in, and what moves we should expect from them. Because until then, it's really difficult to say. But there's certainly some question marks. There's certainly some things to address in Calgary for sure. But until we know who the leaders are, we won't really have a better idea what kind of decisions they might be looking to make. Also in Ottawa, some updates on their ownership situation. As I reported a few days ago, led by Ryan Reynolds, is preparing to make a $1 billion bid. Elliot Friedman mentioned in the latest 32 Thoughts podcast today that we should know more about that sometime later this week. Now, of course, the $1 billion amount is just a rumored amount, and in speculation at this point in time. I know a lot of people are wanting this process to kind of take on the next steps. Friedman even mentioned that a lot of the groups that are, very interested would they just want to know, are we the group getting a team or not? There's also other news today that the group led by Nico Sparks, which is probably your second best odds of buying the team outside of the Ryan Reynolds group, actually has another celebrity involvement, and is quite excited to get involved. That's rapper and businessman Snoop Dogg. So Snoop Doggy Dogg himself is apparently very interested in becoming part owner of the Ottawa Senators, and is part of this Nico Sparks group. It's very interesting to see such a small market team have such high level of interest from such a huge amount of celebrities and Hollywood people that's involved with these different groups in the bidding process. It's not something I really would have expected before, and I'm sure that there's a lot of NHL owners kind of watching this process play out and might consider selling, or the NHL might be considering expanding. I think the price tag on this is going to play a big role in a lot of future decisions around there. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out on that front. And as I mentioned as well, could the Winnipeg Jets and Washington Capitals make really good trade partners? I've seen the Athletic article from Washington media today talking about this possibility, how both teams are facing a lot of questions. Both teams have players that either the team or the player wants to be moved, and likely would accept a trade, even if they have to waive a modified or full no trade clause to do so. Like, for example, Washington, we know the team is very interested in moving winger Anthony Mantha. At one point, Mantha was a 25 to 30 goal guy who had a lot of potential, but obviously has had issues clicking in Washington and making that work long term. And he's also been reported that top centerman Evgeny Kuznetsov would welcome a trade out of Washington as well. And that's something that's been discussed internally between he and the team over the past year or two. So obviously, at this point, they can be players that might interest the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, the Jets, certainly have a little drama in their locker room. There's no doubt about that. Clearly, Rick Bowness and the core group of that players do not see eye to eye. And the core group of players that's there, including Wheeler, Scheifele, and a few others. To me, they don't want to really take responsibility. But Bowness has really called them out on their efforts and pushing back and really, giving everything they have to their team, emptying their tanks. And, they don't seem to enjoy being called out like that. So at the end of the day, both of these teams looking for significant change. Now, would it be a 1-for-1 trade, like a Blake Wheeler for Evgeny Kuznetsov? That might be a scenario that could work. At the end of the day, Kuznetsov has 2 years left at $7.8 million. Wheeler's got 1 year left at $8.25. The numbers are close enough that maybe the Winnipeg Jets maybe retain a little bit on Wheeler to even out the money. That could be an even swap. That might be something that works. It gets them on top center in case they do have to move on from Scheifele or Pierre-Luc Dubois. So in the case of Anthony Mantha, he's got 1 year of $5.7. No guarantees he'd be included in a trade, but it's possible that it could see a trade of, like I said, it could be a Kuznetsov or Wheeler type of deal. Does make sense. It gives the Capitals a veteran scoring winger. It gives the center, some of the Jets, a scoring top six center who has been pretty consistent throughout his career, with a few blips on there, of course. But, you get other pieces that could be involved. The deal could grow and could even grow to being a really big blockbuster deal. It could involve Mark Scheifele. It could include like a guy like Nikolai Ehlers. The conservative defenseman. There's some prospects in there. It's really difficult to say how big the trade could get, but I do think that there's a possibility in Washington, especially if Backstrom's health is a question mark. Because I know based on GM Brian McCullough's remarks on Nicholas Backstrom, I do wonder if he plays next year. I honestly do wonder if that's a possibility that he doesn't. Because if Backstrom is out and Kuznetsov is traded, they're going to be needing at least one centerman for sure. They do have Dylan Strome, who they re-slide to an extension already, but they're going to need more than just Dylan Strome. So maybe a Scheifele-Wheeler combo might actually make sense for them. It's hard to decide, but it could be something that we could see. Although I don't think Scheifele-Wheeler for like Kuznetsov-Mantha, I don't think that is an even deal myself. I think Washington would have to either up the ante or do something on that front. I think if you take a look at Kuznetsov and Wheeler or Kuznetsov and Scheifele, I think the Winnipeg players are more productive overall when you add the two together. So I don't see that necessarily being even to the point that they would pull the trigger on it. But at the same time, it's very intriguing just to look at these two franchises, see where they stand, see these players that could certainly use a change of scenery, or in some cases want a change of scenery, and to see if this deal could work out. I really think that there's a lot here to be considered for each team, and there's a real chance we could see a big trade between the two. But it could be 1-for-1, or it could be substantially larger. Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.